Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Stephanie and I appreciate y'all stopping by. In today's video, I have 6 love-themed decor DIYs to share that are perfect for Valentine's Day, but can also be incorporated into everyday decor. All of these projects are easy to make and will add a touch of romantic charm to any room. Let's go ahead and jump into the first DIY. For this project, I started with one of these 14-inch wire wreath forms from the Dollar Tree and some of this Wool-Ease yarn in the color oatmeal that I picked up at Walmart. I started by adding some hot glue to one of the cross sections of the wreath and placed the yarn on top to secure it in place, adding a dab of hot glue on the back side to secure the end. Once I had the yarn attached to the wreath, I began wrapping it tightly around the wreath and continued to do so until I had the entire wreath form covered. When I had the wreath completely wrapped, I used some hot glue on the back side of the wreath to secure the end of the yarn in place and cut off the excess. Next, I used 4 of these red corrugated cardboard hearts from this package of hearts that I picked up on sale at Hobby Lobby. I used hot glue to attach the 4 hearts together in a line with the second and fourth heart on top of the first and third heart. I wrote out the word love in cursive onto a piece of printer paper to use as a template and then placed a piece of parchment paper on top. Next, I used this cream-colored rope from my stash to make the letters. I traced the letter L onto the parchment paper with my hot glue gun and then placed the rope on top of the glue forming the letter L and adding more hot glue as needed to help hold its shape. Once the glue had cooled off, I was able to peel it from the parchment paper. I then repeated this step to create the O, V, and E. After I had all of the letters made, I laid them out onto the hearts and used hot glue to secure them in place. Next, I took a Cricut pick and poked a hole in the first and second heart right where they were attached to one another. I then took more of the cream-colored rope and used the pick to poke it through the hole on the first heart. Once I had the rope through the heart, I placed a dab of hot glue on the back side to secure it in place. After the rope was secured in place, I went ahead and flipped the heart back over and trimmed up the rope so that it was just long enough to feed through the hole on the second heart, and again used hot glue to secure it in place on the back side. I then repeated these steps to add a stitch between the other 3 hearts. Once the sign was finished, I placed it on the bottom half of the wreath a little ways up from the bottom and used hot glue to secure each end in place. To make the arrow, I used one of these large skewer sticks from the Dollar Tree, as well as one of these large wooden hearts from this pack of wooden heart ornaments from the Dollar Tree. I used Waverly chalk paint in the color crimson to paint both sides of the heart with one good coat. Next, I fed the skewer stick through the right side of the wreath at an angle and through the bottom left side. I then used hot glue to attach the heart to the pointed end of the skewer. I also used 3 of these red feathers from the Dollar Tree and used hot glue to attach them to the other end of the skewer. I placed the largest feather first, underneath the end of the skewer, followed by the 2 smaller feathers on top of the skewer, kind of facing outward so that it looked fuller. Then, to finish up the project, I took some of this white twine from the Dollar Tree and placed a dab of hot glue on the back of the skewer end with the feathers, right over where the stem of the feather was attached to the skewer, and placed the twine on top. I then wrapped the twine around the skewer multiple times to cover up where the feather stems were visible. When I was happy with the way it looked, I then used hot glue to secure the end in place on the back side of the skewer and cut off the excess twine. I then repeated this step to add a matching embellishment to the other end of the arrow right above the top of the heart, again using hot glue to secure the twine in place. Y'all, this turned out so cute. This was not the vision I had in my head when I started, but I think it turned out even better. The only thing that I would change would be the letter E, as I'm not too fond of the way it looks. Moving on to DIY number 2. For this project, I started with 1 sheet of this cream-colored felt from Hobby Lobby and a 3-inch heart template that I cut out of some cardstock. I placed the heart down onto the felt and traced around it twice so that I had 2 pieces per heart, one for the front and one for the back. Once I had both pieces cut out, I placed some hot glue along the outside edge of one of the hearts and placed the other heart on top, pressing the two edges together to create a seam. I then continued around the heart, adding a line of hot glue and pinching the two edges together, making sure to leave the bottom of the heart open. Next, I took some polyfill and stuffed the heart from the bottom, making sure to get enough polyfill inside to make it look like a mini pillow. Once I was happy with the way it looked, I took one of these skewer sticks from the Dollar Tree and added some hot glue around the inside edge of the open section, and then placed the skewer stick inside and sealed up the edges, making sure to add more hot glue as needed to get a good seal. After the glue had fully set up, I took some scissors and evened out the edges around the heart to give it a nice finished look. Next, I used some dark red embroidery floss and an embroidery needle to add a little more detail to the heart. I tied a knot in the end of the floss and then started from the back side of the heart near the stick and began a running simple stitch around the inside edge of the heart, leaving a thin border on the outside edge. I did try to keep my stitching as even and as straight as possible so that it looked nice and neat. I would like to take this time to thank you all for all of the love and support, and to just say that I appreciate each and every one of you. Also, if this is your first time watching, welcome. I would absolutely love it if you would consider hitting that subscribe button if you're enjoying this video. Once I had the entire heart stitched, I tied off the floss on the back side of the heart in a double knot and cut off the excess. I then repeated this step to create 4 more of the cream and red colored hearts. I also used one sheet of this ruby colored felt from Hobby Lobby to create 3 more hearts the same size and used the same technique, only this time instead of the red embroidery floss, I used a pale pink color for the stitching. I used one of these glass fishbowl vases from the Dollar Tree, as well as some of this burlap that I had in my stash as the base for the arrangement. I placed the burlap down inside the vase, leaving just a bit hanging over the edges, and cut it to size. I then used the first piece as a guide to cut a second piece of burlap. Once I had both pieces cut, I placed one piece down inside the vase and then the second piece down on top going in the opposite direction so that I had the pieces of burlap crisscrossing. Next, I took a piece of the soft green floral foam and wrapped it in another piece of the burlap and placed it down inside the vase. After I had the vase ready, I placed the cream-colored hearts in first, cutting the stems to different lengths and sticking them down inside the foam, trying to keep them evenly spaced and at different heights. When I was happy with the placement of the cream hearts, I cut the stems on the ruby hearts and placed them in the arrangement. Then, to finish off this project, I took some Spanish moss from the Dollar Tree and placed it around the top of the vase to add some texture and to help hide more of the foam in the gaps. I absolutely love how this little arrangement turned out, and it was so easy to make. On to DIY number 3. For this project, I used one of these large conversation hearts from the Dollar Tree and started by removing the paper from the front. Next, I used Ceramic Coat paint in the color salmon to give the entire heart 2 good coats. Once the heart was dry, I took some Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster and a stencil brush and lightly dry brushed the entire heart front, back, and sides. I then took one of these small wooden hearts from this ornament pack from the Dollar Tree and used Ceramic Coat paint in the color salmon to paint the front side of the heart. After the paint was dry, I took a finger sander and sanded around the outside edge of the heart to distress it and bring back some of that natural wood color. Next, I added a dab of hot glue to the back of the large heart and placed some of the Dollar Tree twine on top. I then wrapped the twine around the top of the heart 5 times, making sure it overlapped itself at the bottom of the heart but was fanned out at the top. Once I was happy with the way the heart looked, I added another dab of hot glue to the back of the heart and secured the end of the twine in place and cut off the excess. I also used the twine to make a small finger bow by wrapping it around 3 of my fingers several times. I attached the bow to the heart where all of the twine was overlapping at the bottom and then trimmed up the tails. Then, to finish up this project, I used some hot glue to attach the small heart to the center of the bow. Here's a look at how this super quick and easy heart turned out. I absolutely love it. Next up is DIY number 4. For this project, I used one of these 5x7 canvases from the Dollar Tree and started by using a flathead screwdriver and some pliers to carefully remove the staples from the back side of the canvas so that I could remove it from the frame. Next, I used Waverly chalk paint in the color ink to paint the front and sides of the frame. I wanted to use the back side of the canvas material for this project, so I used some Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster and gave it one good coat using the creases along the edges as a guide. Once all the paint was dry, I used some hot glue to reattach the canvas to the back side of the frame, making sure the painted side was going to be seen from the front. I also want to mention that I did make sure to pull the canvas material taut so that there were no visible wrinkles inside the frame. After the glue had set up, I took a sharp utility knife and carefully went around the outside edges of the frame to remove all the excess canvas material. I then printed off this vintage French love letter onto some cardstock, and I will leave a link in the description box below if you'd like to print this out. I'm not the best artist, but I did my best to sketch out this tree onto the letter. Now, if you don't want to try to freehand sketch a tree, you could always go to Google and search for a tree template and print it off and use that. When I was happy with the way the tree looked, I carefully cut it out. Next, I took some Waverly chalk paint in the color ink and a small stiff bristled brush and heavily brushed it along the edges of the tree. I really wanted it to look old and vintage with some ink distressing, so you could always use a black or brown ink pad if you happen to have one on hand. Once I was happy with the way the tree looked, I took a fine tip black marker and drew a tiny heart on the trunk of the tree about halfway up. I used some of this foam and poster board adhesive from the Dollar Tree to attach the tree to the canvas. I went around the edges of the tree on the back side as well as over the larger areas in the middle of the tree with the adhesive, and then carefully placed the tree down onto the canvas as close to the edges as possible, making sure it was completely smoothed out. Next, I took 2 of these small wooden hearts from this ornament pack from the Dollar Tree and used Waverly chalk paint in the color crimson to give just the front sides 2 good coats. Once the hearts were dry, I used Waverly chalk paint in the color ink and heavily distressed around the outside edges of both hearts. Again, you could use an ink pad if you wanted to. After the hearts were completely dry, I took a fine tip black marker and wrote my name on one and my husband's name on the other. I used some of this brown and white baker's twine from the Dollar Tree to hang the hearts from the tree. I cut 2 pieces of the twine and tied a single knot in one end, then placed a tiny dab of hot glue on the back of the knot and placed it down onto the longest tree limb close to the middle of the canvas. I then repeated this step to attach the second piece of twine a little ways away from the first, closer to the end of the limb. After I had the 2 pieces of twine glued into place, I placed the 2 hearts on top of the twine to figure out where I wanted each heart to hang and cut the twine to size. I wanted each heart to hang at different heights to give the piece more interest. Next, I added some hot glue to the back of one of the hearts and placed it down on the first piece of twine. I then repeated this step to add the second heart to the second piece of twine. I decided I did not like the white of the canvas edges showing, so I went back and painted just the edges with some Waverly chalk paint in the color ink. Then, to finish up this project, I took 3 of the tumbling tower blocks from the Dollar Tree and gave them one good coat of Waverly chalk paint in the color ink and attached them using hot glue to the back of the canvas at the bottom so that this piece stands on its own. Now, if you wanted to hang this piece, you could absolutely add a piece of twine or a picture hanger on the back instead of using the blocks. Here's a look at how this project turned out. I am absolutely in love with this piece, and it will become a staple piece of decor in my bedroom. Moving on to DIY number 5. For this project, I used one of these pieces of craft wood from the Dollar Tree, and it's roughly 7 inches tall and 3.5 inches wide. I started by using Waverly antique wax to stain the entire piece of wood. Next, I used Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster along with a stencil brush to heavily dry brush the entire piece. I also used one of these mini burlap sacks that I had in my stash from Hobby Lobby and cut the drawstrings to remove them. I also went ahead and removed the bow so that I had just the plain burlap sack. After the wood piece was completely dry, I placed it down inside the burlap sack so that it was covering just the bottom half of the wood. Next, I used some hot glue to attach the excess part of the sack to the back of the wood. I then took some scissors and removed the excess burlap, then used more hot glue as needed to make sure it was completely attached to the wood and that it all looked nice and neat with no excess burlap hanging freely to be seen from the front. Once I was happy with the way the pocket looked, I took the top piece of a boxwood pick from Walmart and placed it down inside the pocket on the front. Next, I took some of these leftover glittered hearts that I had in my stash from the Dollar Tree and cut down the stems and arranged them in the pocket. I placed the two open hearts on the sides and the solid heart in the middle. I also made sure that the solid heart was the tallest and the other two hearts were at different heights. I wasn't fond of the red stem of the solid heart showing, so I went ahead and added another piece of boxwood in front to hide it. Then to finish up this project, I took some of this sheer red ribbon from the Dollar Tree and wrapped it around the top of the burlap pocket and tied it in a knot, then trimmed up the tails. Here's a look at how this project turned out. I think it turned out really cute and it was super quick and easy to put together. I think it would be the perfect addition for a tiered tray or to help fill up some empty space on a small shelf. Last but not least, DIY number 6. For this project, I used one of these styrofoam cones and a package of this Valentine's Day gift tissue, all from the Dollar Tree. I started by cutting the tissue paper into roughly 3" by 3" squares. Once I had the pieces cut, I took one of these cake decorating tools with the ball ends from the Dollar Tree and wrapped one piece of the tissue paper around it so that it looked like this. I then used some Eileen's tacky glue to attach the tissue to the cone by dipping the end of the tissue into the glue and pressing it onto the cone. I then carefully pulled out the cake decorating tool. I then continued to repeat this process using just the solid pink tissue paper until I had the entire cone covered. I was able to cover this entire cone using just one package of the gift tissue. Now, if you don't have one of these tools, you could use the eraser end of a pencil, the end of a pen, paintbrush, or dowel rod, just as long as it has a blunt end. This project did take a little bit of time, so I would recommend putting on a movie or your favorite show and relaxing while placing the tissue paper. When I was happy with the way the cone looked, I set it aside to dry for a couple of hours. I did go ahead and cover another one of the styrofoam cones from the Dollar Tree with the heart tissue paper, but I did have to get an additional 2 sheets from another package to have enough to cover this cone completely. I made this tiny cone using the leftover pieces of tissue by cutting them into roughly 2" by 2" squares and using one of these mini tree cones that I had left over in my stash. Here's a look at how these 3 Valentine's Day trees turned out. I am in love with these. They were so easy to make and turned out absolutely gorgeous. And that's it for all of today's Love Theme Decor DIYs. I hope you enjoyed watching and were inspired to create some of these projects for your own home. Which one of these projects is your favorite? Let me know in the comments below. My favorite was the couple's canvas followed by the heart bouquet. I want to thank each and every one of you for stopping by, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up as it really does help me out here on YouTube. And if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, what are you waiting for? Click that button and stick around for a little while. I have tons of fun projects on the way. I'll see y'all next time.